Secret Circle.
Welcome to the Secret Circle with me, Dr. Luke Deckard, the podcast where I chat with authors, filmmakers, musicians, and more about the art of their craft and let you in on some of their secrets. Today's guest is author JOHNATHAN WHITELAW. He's the writer of the Bingo Hall Detectives and the Village Hall Vendetta and more. Today we're talking about writing processes, cozy crime, and how you keep the genre fresh in a rather oversaturated market. JOHNATHAN, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me, Doctor. It's congratulations are in order,
Thank you.
obviously, both for your doctorate and this brand new show. I'm delighted to be here and be on the other end of the mic with you once again, Dr.
Yes,
Deckard.
indeed. Yes, indeed. We've had many conversations on the on my old podcast, Luke Deckard Show, which you can find archived on YouTube if you would like to go back and listen to me rant about all sorts of pop culture stuff, many times with JOHNATHAN. It was good stuff. It was good stuff.
It was good stuff. It is good stuff. Yeah,
absolutely. We tore apart the Mandalorian. It was
we did multiple times. I think. I'm almost certain that the Mandalorian came up at least once on shows that we did together that weren't anything to do with the Mandalorian.
Probably.
And that's what it is. But
yeah,
there you go.
I think
Target
so.
on your back.
So okay, with this particular show, what I like to do initially with all the writers that I bring on is I like to ask them first the philosophical question of why is it that you write?
Okay.
So there you go.
Oh, that's the question.
That's the question.
Sorry, I thought there was I wasn't paying attention. I beg your pardon. Why do I write? I guess. I guess it's because it's the only thing I know. It's the only thing I know how to do. I mean, there's a story I always tell about writing because, when you are a writer, you inevitably get asked, when did you first start doing it? When did you first start, putting together narratives and characters and all the rest of it? And the story I always tell is when I was younger, probably about 5 or 6 or something like that. So at school, and we used to go on holiday quite a bit, and I always wanted to take my action figures, dating myself here, but Captain Scarlet figures and Thunderbirds and Batman and Star Wars and what have you. And it got to the stage where my parents were paying thousands and thousands of pounds in excess baggage because I was carting the Batmobile and the Batplane and the Millennium Falcon in our suitcase. So my mother decided that it would be a lot cheaper if she gave me a notepad and a packet of pencils and said, right, we're not taking this stuff. You can get it when we come back after a week or 10 days or 2 weeks or what have you. So what I used to do was while I was on holiday, I used to write down the stories that I wanted to then act out with my characters and action figures when I came home, Lego and all the rest of it. And that's what I would do. So, it would be whatever. It would be Batman versus the Joker somewhere, or some sort of Star Wars adventure or something to do with Lego. And then I would come home and I would act out what I'd written.
Yeah.
And that's really what my first kind of memories of putting together a story. Telling stories. And quite frankly, I've not stopped since. I was I always wrote throughout school. I always loved that in primary school and secondary school, when you used to get creative writing exercises. I did it at university. I had it on the side when I was studying psychology, and then I became a journalist, and that's writing every day. But I was always writing my fiction, and it is a craft. And one of the really, really interesting things always was that I always had the energy to do it after an 8-hour shift, 9-hour shift as a journalist. Yeah. I always kind of saw, if you're sitting writing 10, 15 stories a day, very different obviously to fiction.
Absolutely.
Or it should be very different. Your journalism should be very different to fiction.
In 2023, that's what is truth?
Yeah, exactly.
What is fiction? What is reality?
But yeah, it used to be like a warm up. You wouldn't just go and run the Boston Marathon without having done months and months of training, years of training for it. So it was always really, really good to do that. So yeah, I've always done it. It's the only thing I know how to do. Whether I do it well or not is a completely different debate, and not for me to say. But it's what I've always done.
It's fascinating the way what you're mentioning there, that you used to take your action figures and your parents gave you the notebook and said, write your story, write and da 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 da. Because early in one of my my very first episode of The Secret Circle, I had James Benmore on, who
Yeah, yeah.
wrote the Dodger books and
Yep.
most recently Asked for Mercy, and asked him the same question. And it's fascinating that both of you have a similar kind of story, in that you as children you were telling stories with your action figures,
Yeah.
and that's kind of a big part of your early development of as to becoming a writer is telling stories that way. um and it's because it's interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think about it even in my own experience, like as a kid. Yeah, definitely. Uh,
Yeah, I mean, that's it. Like I would spend hours. I was never happier than when I was in my bedroom or whatever with
yeah,
with the an X-wing and a TIE fighter and and Thunderbird 2 and things like that.
yeah,
Never ever happier than that, and to the
yeah,
point where I always wanted to take the stuff with me, and that went on throughout my entire childhood. And the thing was, like, it got to that stage where I would still be writing the stories,
mm,
not just when I was away, not just when I was on holidays, and gradually it became, it got to that stage where you were inventing your own characters. It wasn't just Han Solo,
yes,
Batman. It was they were actual original characters that you were coming up with. Um, and reading as well. Obviously,
yes,
reading's a big thing, and I always loved books, and I still love books, and I still love to read, and that being encouraged at a very young age. And it's something that I do with my own son. We read every night, and
mm,
and it's such a wonderful gift. It's a gift that I was given, and it's something that I always pass on. And what interestingly, you're never too old.
yeah,
Something
no,
like reading and
yeah,
and writing as well, fiction, right? You're never ever too old to pick it up and start it again, or start it
definitely not.
again, or
Yeah,
pick it up for the first time. It's not a time sensitive thing. It's
no,
absolutely, isn't it? And it is a wonderful gift to be given and to receive as well. And yeah, and I think, I mean, yeah, all us writers, this as well. Look, we are all readers, and we're all avid readers, and
mm,
and and it's you pick things up, good and bad, from other people that write, maybe not necessarily in your own genre or subgenre, but elsewhere, and that all goes into shaping you as a writer. But yeah, it
yeah,
is. It's. I mean, I loved it. I just loved having that scope to have the imagination just
definitely.
run away from me, really.
Did you ever write fan fiction as a kid of any kind?
No, no, not really. It was always, like I said, if it was sort of born through necessity that I didn't have my
Right.
Darth Vader and Boba Fett figures with me,
Yeah.
so I would do whatever that was. But I mean, when I kind of, I don't want to say when I grew up, because I don't think I've ever grown up. I don't think I ever will grow up. Um, but I never no, it never really factored in. I'm not
Mm,
sure why. I mean, again, it might be again dating myself. It might be a sort of product of, like, I grew up in the 1990s
mm,
when there was a dearth of, like, visual media for things like Star Wars
yeah.
and Doctor Who.
Yeah.
Big sci-fi nuts. So, but there was a lot of multimedia that weren't the movies and the TV shows. There was a
Yeah.
lot, like, loads and loads of Doctor Who novels, the New
Yeah.
Adventures, the Missing Adventures, and stuff like that. Obviously, all the now Legends canon for Star Wars.
Mm,
So I kind of felt that I got my fix with that
okay.
because I could sit down and I could read it. Big Finish audios as well for Doctor
Of
Who. Used
course.
to used
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
listen to
Yeah.
them, and then of course you get to 1999 and you've got the Phantom Menace comes out, and there's suddenly this resurgence of Star Wars stuff.
Yeah.
2005, obviously, for Doctor Who. But I always kind of felt that I got my fix for those sorts of stories, that I didn't have to come up with them myself. I was also
Okay.
probably, and to a certain degree still am, intimidated to do that. James
Mm,
Cameron always famously said, when he took over the Alien franchise, he said that, um, you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't with that sort of stuff, because
yeah.
all the good stuff that I do in my sequel will be credited to Ridley Scott, and all the bad stuff that I do will be blamed on me. Um, and it's true, right? It's true with these sort of intellectual properties, and that's it. He just eloquently, he was just able to sort of describe it in an eloquent manner that I've always remembered. So yeah, I think there probably was an intimidation factor there. I also really enjoyed coming up with my own stuff.
Mm,
Like, even at a young age, I enjoyed having a character. Now, God forbid I'd be able to find all that stuff and go back at it. I'd probably be able to identify it with adult eyes and say, that's a Han Solo ripoff. That's a,
Right.
that's a
Yeah. Yeah.
Scarlet
Yeah.
ripoff. Of course it was, right? But so it probably was fan fiction and everything but name.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I get that. I get that. So the books that you write nowadays, the
Yeah.
Bingo Hall Detectives and the Village Hall Vendetta.
Yeah.
You're writing what is typically called cozy crime.
Yeah.
For those at home who don't know, I figure most people listening will know, but for the two people who don't know what cozy crime is,
Yep.
what's your definition of cozy crime?
So I always describe it as a traditional mystery where you don't have any sort of graphic sex scenes or violence. So, for want of a better expression, the knife goes in, but you don't ever see the knife go in.
Yeah.
Invariably, there's a murderer that has to be caught. There's a killing that has to be solved, and 99.9% of the time, the people that are your main protagonists that are solving the murder aren't law enforcement. They're not cops. They're not PIs. They're not ex-cops or anything like that. They usually tend to be normal people.
Yeah.
So at time of recording, I've been teaching an 8-week course about cozy mystery, and in the process of that, it's actually been really fascinating because I've kind of had to sit down and think about what this is, what is it I've been writing for the last three plus years. And there's a phrase that I've stuck on, is that a cozy mystery is a mystery, is a whodunit, but it's rooted in the humdrum of real life. So your main characters are people like you and I, and how I try and describe it when I teach it is, think what you would do as a normal person if you had a murder to solve. And with the Bingo Hall Detectives, that is a series. I mean, that's where the idea came from. That was a proper lightning bolt to the back of my head. I was at my mother-in-law's in Northern Ireland one Easter, maybe about 5-6 years ago, and this old pop star came on the TV, and I turned over to Margaret and I said, I honestly don't know where this came from, but I just looked over at Margaret and I said, what would happen if she was murdered and you and I had to catch the killer? And she said there'd be two more murders, namely yours and mine, Jonathan, long before we caught the actual killer. And I sat on it for years, and then it came back just through opportunities and stuff like that. But that's it. Like, my character's Jason's an outwork journalist. His mother-in-law is a sort of well-to-do pillar of the community in Penrith in Cumbria. But they're ordinary people. They're not cops. They're not PIs. They're not military police. They're not CIA. They're not MI6. They're ordinary people who are faced with an extraordinary set of circumstances, and through various degrees of motivation, good and bad, they feel that it's their duty to catch the killer.
Yeah, I thought that's a good explanation of kind of what that kind of genre represents. How do you factor in like the outliers, I think, but also the pillars of the genre? People like Sherlock Holmes, Poirot, who are they're amateur sleuths. They're not the law. But they are quasi PIs basically, because people go to them for help and the police use them. How do you factor those kind of figures in with your lessons?
Well, I think it's all to do with contemporary fiction. If you're writing the world was a very, very different place in the 1930s, where Poirot mostly takes place, and the 1860s or whatever it is, the
1860s.
1880s,
sir.
I beg your pardon, sorry.
Up to 1914 or 1913.
That's it. This can't go out now, Luke. That's it. I'm going to be excommunicated by the mystery and crime writing community, unfortunately. It was nice while it lasted. It was always going to happen, right? It was always going to happen. So, very, very different worlds back then, right? And very, very different attitudes towards things. And I think, and this is one of the really good things about this resurgence in cozy crime and this sort of move into the popular zeitgeist, to sound rather highfalutin, is that you're getting characters who are who are from the 21st century, right?
Mm.
They have the flaws of 21st century people.
Yeah.
They have the attributes and skill sets and positives of 21st century people. And I think, I mean, that's the thing about, you know, if you set a Cosy in 1930,
Mm.
like any historical writing, and I know that sounds odd to say 100 years ago is historical. I read somewhere recently that the 1960s is now considered historical, but of
Mm.
course, history's
Yeah.
gaining on us every year, right? That's how it works.
Yeah.
But if you write anything in a historical context, it's got to reflect the time, just as it does if you write something in 2023. So
Yeah.
it's something it's something that, you know, when I'm talking about cozy crime, I think you can't avoid it, because you're right. Like, you know, Holmes and Poirot in particular they are cops in all but name,
Mm.
in that they can't make an arrest, but they work so closely with the police
Yeah.
that it's that they may as well have a badge. But that reflects back then when you could do things like that, right? And there wasn't all this red tape, and there wasn't all that, or maybe not as much as that sort of red tape, where you could have these types of characters very much being part of the investigation. Whereas now, obviously, it's a completely different ball game.
Yeah.
Maybe it's more dangerous. I don't know, but it's a very different world. Law enforcement is very different 2023 than it was even in
Definitely.
1993. You know, it's
Definitely.
that's it, right?
Yeah. For you, who are the golden age writers that inspire you the most?
Again, I suppose I've already been excommunicated. I've excommunicated myself, but I think it would be, if I didn't say Agatha Christie, I think that would be it. I think I would get my writing license revoked, and I would be thrown in jail, art jail. But yeah, I mean, the thing is, do you know, weirdly, my wife and I watched A Haunting in Venice
I'm sorry.
the other night, the other night there, and that's based on an Agatha Christie. I don't know why. I mean, that's all three of those Kenneth
Based.
Branagh. That's all three of those Poirot movies with Kenneth Branagh that I've now watched, and I don't know why I keep going back. Honestly,
I didn't either. I didn't either. I
I've
gave
watched.
up
The thing
after
is,
Murder on the Orient Express. I was done. I was like,
I've
never
watched
again
them
am I
all.
watching these.
I've watched them all as well. Like, it's not like I've left after 20 minutes or 15 minutes or whatever. I've watched every single one of them.
Oof.
I don't know why I do it. Honestly, I must be a sadist. Anyway, but my wife and I were talking about it, and we ended up having a kind of fairly lengthy debate about characters like Poirot and Miss Marple and stuff. And like, you know, it's absolutely remarkable. It's remarkable the feat of imagination and the feat of innovation that someone like Agatha Christie could have had as an author for us to still be making these movies and using these characters, and it's so much part of our culture that we almost don't even know about it.
Mm.
And I think with particularly with some, you know, a Miss Marple character, like the Miss Marple character comes up time and time and time again.
Yeah.
You know, you can't tell me that Jessica Fletcher from Murder She
Oh.
Wrote isn't Miss
Yeah,
Marple. In
of
fact,
course she is.
I only learned recently that oh god, Angela Lansbury, almost forgot a name there. She played Miss Marple. There's
Oh, yeah.
a 70s Miss Marple where it's Angela Lansbury, and that's like, you know, I mean, that's two titans of popular culture over the last 100 years smashed together in a 90-minute film or what have you. So yeah, you can't. I mean, it's unavoidable, and it is remarkable. I mentioned Christie a couple of weeks ago in this class that I taught, and I looked up the numbers, and the estimates are between 2 and 4 billion book sales in what 110 years or something like that. I mean, it's absolutely extraordinary, extraordinary. And there's an argument to be made that none of us would be here as crime writers now without the likes of her, and of course Conan Doyle as well, operating, you know, 50 years before or what have you, if my timeline's right, but which it probably isn't. But yeah, I mean, you can't get away from it, and all roads lead back to Christie, and that's so. I mean, I'm okay with that. That's not. I'm not a critic of it.
That's interesting. We won't go into that debate. I don't know if all roads lead back to Christie. But she is definitely a stop along the way. She's definitely a stop along the way. What do you think is the reason? Like, that cozy crime is having such a resurgence right now. It's always been around, like, as you said.
Oh yeah, yeah,
Christie's always been there. Conan Doyle's always been there. Dorothy Sayers. All these things have always been. They've always made lots and lots and lots of money. Every once, there's these films that come up here, and once,
absolutely.
films, TV show, all that kind of stuff. But right now, it's at a particular height.
Yeah,
You have you have Ryan Johnson's
yeah.
Knives Out movies. You have the murder. What's the only
Only
murderers in the
Murders in the
building?
Building. Yeah, yeah,
Yep.
yeah, yeah.
Various things that kind of Columbo ripoff that's on some network.
Poker Face.
Poker Face. There we
Yeah,
go.
yeah, yeah.
You have a lot of the stuff that's out there that's really heavily leaning into the
Yeah.
cozy stuff, and just obviously books are on the rise. You have your books are out there. My friend, Bonnie, she has her Sherlock Holmes books that are out there.
Yep.
You have so much stuff going on with this genre. What do you think is the root of the resurgence with this?
I think it's a twofold thing for me. The first one is, and there are academic studies that don't come to mind what they are, but I am aware of them that have proven that things like traditional mystery, cozy mystery, always have a resurgence when times are tough.
Yeah.
And unlike other forms of crime fiction, certainly there is the escapism is ramped all the way up to 11.
Yeah.
Within cozy mystery, it has to be, right. And as a cozy mystery writer, as any sort of writer, but particularly mystery writer, there's always that expectation that readers will, to a certain degree, check their sensibilities off at the door when they pick up the book.
Yes.
Like murder investigations in real life, thank God, are usually done very, very quickly, and the killer is caught relatively soon after it happens. Doesn't always happen that way, of course, but through the competence of detectives and law enforcement, these things happen quite quickly. Whereas, if you reflected that in crime fiction, it'd be over probably before the end of the first chapter, right? That's it. So how do you spin it out to 90,000 words? Well, you've got red herrings and you've got mistakes and stuff like that. And with cozy, I think again, readers kind of pick up a cozy novel and they check even that checked out sensibility and that sense of reality, because there's a predisposition there, I think, for wanting to enjoy the story and wanting to like the characters immediately. And that sense of escapism, I think, is a big part of the modern resurgence of cozy, because it's been a brutal few years on almost every front for almost everybody on the planet, right? From pandemics to now we're seeing conflicts all over the world. And sometimes you just want to sit down with a really, really good story that you're not going to get horrified with, and you're not going to get shocked by necessarily. And again, I'm always aware when I say these things that sounds negative, but it's not meant to sound negative, and it certainly isn't negative. Sometimes you just want that warm blanket. Sometimes you don't want to go out to party. You just want to stay home and watch something silly, or read something that it's all going to be all right in the end, right? And again, living in the world that we do and living in the times that we do, I think that's why I write them. Quite frankly, I was a journalist for 12 years, and some of the stuff that I saw and heard happen and stuff that I reported on. I mean, to be able to sit down at night and transport myself to the world of Jason and Amata, where it's Penrith and it's bingo clubs and it's murderers on the loose, right? But I mean, it was a relief for me, and I also think one of the other reasons that I think that it's enjoying a resurgence is that you've got a lot of writers now who are making it very modern. The notion that a cozy mystery has to take place in a country house, and it has to have your Miss Marple type character as the one, this daughtery old woman who's the one that outsmarts the killer.
Yes.
He says with a 70-something-year-old daughtery woman in his collection of them in his novels, but those notions no longer apply all the time. You can have, we've got cozy mysteries that have got retired teachers. We've got pastry chefs. We've got out of work journalists. You know, we've got dog sitters.
Yes.
The great Anthony Johnson. You know,
Yep.
we've got medium, we've got fake mediums, we've got real mediums. You know, it's people that are from, like I said, it's rooted in the humdrum of real life, and it's real life people that are the ones that are trying to catch these killers. And the great thing about it is that with this resurgence, it means that it's brought what was maybe arguably quite a stuffy, old-fashioned subgenre completely up to date. And it
Mm.
means that you've got great writers who might not necessarily have decided to write in this particular subgenre 10, 15 years ago. They're now writing in this subgenre, and they're bringing with them their talent and their skill and their comedy and their lightness of touch and their sinister motives and everything
Mm.
into a
Yes.
genre that maybe wouldn't have been touched, like I said,
Yeah.
not that long ago.
It's interesting. Excuse me. It's interesting because I'm thinking, kind of along these lines, is that you have this discourse, I think, within the cozy circles, um, of cozy writers being frustrated by being called cozy.
Yeah.
Um, I'm curious as to kind of where you land on this. I mean, even like the quote unquote big dogs like Richard Osman, who writes cozy crime,
Yeah.
is saying, "Oh, I don't write cozy crime." Well,
Yeah.
mate, you do, you know. So what's interesting to me is so there's this discourse out there that's trying to say that, oh, don't call me cozy because I write about murder. Well,
Yeah.
you do, but also it's a fairy tale.
Yeah.
You're kind
Yeah.
of what who was it who said that? Julian Simmons
Yeah.
said the golden age and stuff is effectively, it's a fairy tale,
Yeah. Yeah.
but that's not a bad thing.
Absolutely not.
It's that's its point. Is it's
Absolutely.
hyper real. It's there's
Absolutely.
chaos and you fix it by the end.
Yeah.
So I guess what I'm curious as to where do you land on that argument, and do you think that there even should, what should we even be worrying about authors being like, don't call me cozy, or like just embrace it? Come on.
Yeah, it's never bothered me.
Yeah.
I've never been ashamed of it. I've never been embarrassed by it. I
Mm,
mean, it is what it is, right?
yeah.
The wider debate is here, like, you know, what's a label? It's art
Yeah.
versus business. You've got to label something to sell it, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes it's easier to just say, this is what this novel is,
Yeah.
in order to get it under the noses of agents and publishers and all the rest of it, movie directors and TV producers and stuff like that. Like, we label things all the time.
Yeah.
And the thing is, I mean, this debate goes beyond cozy. Like, there are crime writers that I know that don't like to be called crime writers. They like to be called thriller writers. And it's like, well, all right, okay,
Okay.
that's all right. Of course, absolutely. And everyone's entitled to their opinion. Of course they are. For
Yeah.
me, it's never been a problem. I don't ever have an issue saying that I'm a cozy writer. If anything, actually, I'm quite proud to say that I'm a cozy writer,
Yeah.
because it's a term that I think, regardless of what your opinion of labels and that type of thing are, when you tell someone that you're a cozy writer or it's a cozy crime novel,
Mm,
people already know what it is. And I think,
yes.
particularly with cozy, exactly as you say, look,
Yeah.
that idea that fairy tale, it's a lot more of a fairy tale than, say, a police procedural is
Oh
on
yeah.
paper,
Yeah.
or a psychological thriller, or anything else. You know, it is a fairy tale. It's characters that are, you know, they have quirks, but they
Yeah.
have deliberate quirks, and they've
Yeah.
got silly names, and they do silly things, and they find themselves in silly situations. And, you know, caper is another word that a lot of people don't like.
Mm,
Um, Across all genres, I guess, you know, because there's a kind of feeling that it immediately dumbs it down, or it
yeah.
simplifies it. But I mean,
Yeah.
it's never been a problem. I've never ever bought into, don't call it this, call it that.
Yeah.
It is what it is.
Because it's
It
like you were
is what
saying
it is.
earlier, like you were saying with cozy crime and golden age crime, you you don't see the knife go in,
Yeah.
but you see the body on the floor,
Oh yeah.
you see the
Yeah. Yeah.
knife in the body.
Yeah.
But violence is very, very sanitized
Yeah.
in these books. Whereas if I'm to pick up a Raymond Chandler or Sarah Paretsky or something like that, Michael Connolly, you're
Yeah.
going to get much more graphic detail,
Absolutely.
both in violence and in the romance, and generally Cozy, and Golden Age, is relatively. It's almost like it was Marvel Cinematic Universe before Marvel.
Yes.
Like there's like there might be a kiss, but there is like no sex in those universes.
No, 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 no. No blood. Yeah,
No.
or it goes from no blood to you never see the blood run out, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, it's a hallmark of it, right? And
Yeah.
I've always been of the belief that with cozy mystery, you can tell any story that you want, right?
Yeah.
You can tell any story that you want. It's just how you package it. And this notion that cozy crime and cozy crime writing, because you don't have these blow by blow descriptions of a knife going in, or what happens when someone gets shot point blank in the
Yeah.
back of the head.
Yeah.
Um, that necessarily doesn't make it crimey enough. That doesn't
Mhm.
that sort of reduces the fact that it's a crime. I don't necessarily buy into that, because the research
No.
that you have to do as a cozy crime novelist is
Yeah.
just as much as you would if you're writing a police procedural, because
Yeah.
well, you may not put that information in there. You've still got to know what happens so that you can write, so that you can't put it in there, if that makes sense. You've got to be able to write around it and deal with the after effects and all the rest of it.
Yes.
So there's no easier nature of it. I was on a panel at an event over here in Canada earlier on in
Mm.
the summer, and I was on with a cozy writer, and she shocked the room, not in a good way, when she was asked about, why do you write cozy crime, and she said, well, I don't like doing research, so I write cozy crime so that I don't have to. And I was right beside her, and I was like, she didn't just say that, did she? Am I having some sort of episode where like I imagined what she just said there, and
Oh
like the
God.
room, I mean, thankfully the room were on my side, right? Because like I've never seen
Yeah.
40, 50 people's faces all drop simultaneously.
Well,
And she
yeah.
went on, in fairness, she went on to describe her process, and what she does and how she gets around that.
Mm.
But she lost me, and I couldn't get my head quite. Yeah, I still can't, right?
Yeah, that's nuts to me, because when I think about, like, with your books and how your processes work, and I think about, um, my friend Bonnie, or Sophia, who writes
Yeah,
who wrote the Windsor Knot and the Queen
yeah, yeah, yeah.
mystery books. um, so much research has to go into
Absolutely,
those. So much research, because
absolutely.
you want things to be. The trouble with the cozy stuff for me, not the trouble, I suppose, but I don't know, the difficulty with it is that you have to come up with this insane elaborate way in which someone is murdered, that's so absurdly implausible, but then you also have to make that plausible.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? And but that's part of the fun. That's not me knocking it.
it is.
That's part of
Yeah,
the fun of the genre.
it is. It is.
It's
It is.
much different to Raymond Chandler, where he's, the guy just beats someone up, or shoots someone. And it's simple murder in that
Yeah, yeah,
sense,
yeah.
or more realistic murder, I suppose. Whereas it takes a lot of effort to research and
It
work
does.
out
It does.
things.
There's more of a kind of puzzle building element of it that
Yeah.
you've got to kind of try and factor in. One of the big things, weirdly, one of the big things that I've found, particularly with the Bingo Hall Detectives series, because we're on to the third one in the new year in
Mm,
April, and there's a fourth one as well. But what I've found is the one that the challenge, the biggest challenge that I find writing them is the motivation of the characters,
hmm hmm
because
hmm
they are amateur, right? And you think you're unlucky if something like this happens to ordinary people once. You're pushing it a little bit when it happens twice,
Yeah.
but a third time and a fourth time and potentially any more. How do you get around that? But
Yeah.
thankfully, I've got a very, very good editor at Harper North, and it is a debate that we have every single time. Is what's the motivation? What's Jason and Amita's motivation here to
Yeah.
be chasing another killer when
Yeah.
you've got a perfectly competent police force
Yeah.
that are also doing the exact same thing? What's their motivation? But actually, do you know something? As much as when I sit down to write a new one, um, and this isn't unique to me. This is all cozy writers,
Mm,
because, like I said, it's amateur detectives. What's their motivation?
mm.
Um, I think once I get over that hump, and once I have that motivation down, then I have this great sense of relief because we've got it down. And but that's nice. I like that as a writer
Mm.
because it's a challenge, right?
Yeah.
You're challenging yourself literally with every book to reason why. It's also, arguably it's a bit of a cheat for character development as well. Like you have to, that these characters are having to carry with them the baggage of what's happened before. And that in turn is going to have to lead them down the garden path as to, again, why they're going to try and catch a horrible killer of some innocent person. And ultimately, I mean, like, even saying that out loud, that's still what happens. That's at the core of a cozy mystery.
Yes.
You think it has this fluffiness, it has the fairy tale, notion about it, but ultimately, usually 99% of the time, there's a killer on the loose and someone's lost their life, and that's a heinous crime that has to be that justice must be served, and as it rightly should be. So you have to bear that in mind, I guess, with it. But it's been an interesting. It's not something that I necessarily thought of when I first kind of came up with the idea for the series. But it's come about because you're moving forward with it. But I mean, Jessica Fletcher, we've mentioned it already. What I get out of that is that she's a crime writer, and she just uses this Nick's murder as the inspiration. I mean, that's a stroke of genius. It really is.
Yes. When you're because we've kind of hinted at this, like it is actually quite difficult to come up with the complex ways in which the crime has happened, and then the solving of it. Some of my early books were Golden Age stuff, and it is really it's really stinking hard. So I'm curious for you, how do you, when you're sitting down to write your books, where do you start? Do you some people say, well, you work backwards, obviously, but like not everyone does that, and I think that's easier said than done.
No. I mean, it's difficult. It's hard. Like I said, with the Bingo Hall Detectives, like that was just like a bolt out of the blue. That was purely circumstantial, where whatever happened, whatever chemical reaction happened in my head at that time, given the stimulus, that's where it came from. With the Village Hall Vendetta, more premeditated, obviously, because it's the second in the series, and I've always loved art. I mean, the book's dedicated. The book's dedicated to my love of art, and of course, within the context of the book, it's about reportedly cursed painting, and it's led to the latest owner being murdered and what have you. And in the acknowledgement section, I thank two of my art teachers from school who introduced me to art. So, I always wanted to do something within that sort of sphere. And, it may not necessarily, it's not the Thomas Crown affair. It's not about stealing paintings and stuff like that. But it's a way in. With the new one, I can't go into too many details, but that was a sort of similar setup. That was like, I had this kind of one line or this one notion as to what I wanted to put the characters through. And then from there, really what I tend to do is the first thing I always do when I sit down to write, I write anything, I guess, but I work from maybe no more than a 2-page synopsis that will run through the whole story. Not going into great details, but, introductions of characters and the twists and the red herrings and ultimately how it's resolved in no more than 2 pages. And the reason I keep it to 2 pages, and the reason I do that first, is that when I get into the mire of being 40,000-50,000 words into the manuscript, I can go back to that and go, oh, right, yeah, damn, that's what this book is actually about. Because I trust past Jonathan to have done a lot better a job than current Jonathan, who's mired in, like I said, 40,000-50,000 words, and has decided to go rogue and be a maverick cop and play by his own rules. And then I have to pull myself back into the room with, I mean, don't get me wrong, sometimes sometimes I go back and actually what I've written, and if it's strayed off what I'd originally written at any point 6, 8, 10 weeks ago, 2 months ago, or what have you, I prefer the route that I've gone down. But that's how I tend to work it out. And I've got the resolution. I've got who the killer is or killers are. I've got who the victims are. I've got how it's happened and how it gets unraveled. In the case of the Bingo Hall Detectives, how Jason and Amata sort of bumble their way to catching who it is. And that's a godsend. Like I couldn't do it without that now. Because it would be hopeless, and I'd get nothing done. I really wouldn't get anything done. But I write sequentially. I write sequentially. Like I'll start on chapter 1 but it's as much, certainly the first draft, it's as much me telling telling myself the story as it is anything else.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
that's the exciting part about it, right? It's that's why we write, is that
Yeah.
we love stories, and telling yourself a story is great fun, or it should be anyway.
It should be. No, I like this idea that you write this two-page synopsis out of kind of what the story is. It reminded me of Blake Snyder a little bit, the guy who wrote Save the Cat.
Oh yeah, yeah,
It's a
yeah, yeah, yeah.
screenwriting book for those who don't
Mhm.
know, but incredible
Yep.
resource for any writer really. And one of the really important things he says at the very early part of that book is that you need to write a log line. If you can't write a log
Yeah,
line,
yeah,
then you
absolutely.
don't know your story. And I'm like, and it's one of those things where it's so simple. I mean, a log line is a
Yeah,
sentence, sentence and a half, it's not
absolutely.
long, but it's like, it's just, if you can capture what that story is
That's it.
in that bit, then it makes it clearer to you as the writer that you know what you're
Absolutely.
doing and where to go. It doesn't mean you can't go down some rabbit trails and see,
No, far
you
from
know,
it. Yeah,
the book I'm working on right now, like today, when I was doing my writing time, what I thought was going to happen has been paused and moved to a later chapter because I put this other bit as I was editing a chapter where I actually wanted my protagonist to go off and do something else.
yeah,
That was more of a pause, more of a break
yeah.
in the action, which is quite important. So that's kind of leads me to my next question, and that is, these the Cosy crime stuff. They're fun to. You're kind of always thinking about the plot and what's going on and stuff like that. How do how important is it to you to have moments throughout this of protagonists' real life?
Yeah.
Because real life, like, you read Sherlock Holmes, you read Poirot, you read all those people, none of them have a life outside of the
No,
investigation.
no.
They just are that. I guess
Yeah,
Holmes, that's not entirely true because Holmes does go listen to concerts and stuff like that.
yeah,
But for the most part, these, if we're going more Christie stuff or we're going Dorothy Sayers, it's very much
yeah,
just the case and
yeah.
no, so how important is that for you?
I think it's vitally important for Cozy,
Mm,
because I think, as we've talked about already, it's rooted in the humdrum of real life, and I think
yeah.
obviously humor is a big part of Cozy crime, huge
Mm,
part of Cozy
mm,
crime, and
yes.
I think a lot of humor can come about from real life situations. Like, you never see Poirot go for a pee,
Right.
right? You never see Holmes go collect his shopping. Obviously, he
Yeah.
wouldn't get it from Tesco, but you know what I mean. There's
Yeah.
never
He's got
a
Mrs.
scene.
Hudson for that. That's why he's paying
Well,
her the
that's
big
that's true.
bucks.
That's true. But again, you never see Mrs. Hudson go and do it, right? And you
No,
never
you
see
don't.
Mrs. Hudson standing with the ketchup and catsup, to get back to the popular culture. That never ever happens. Whereas you've got a natural in to be able to do stuff like that in Cozy Crime.
Mm,
And actually, I find that a lot of my humor for my Cozy Crime novels comes about through those situations. I mean, don't get me
mm.
wrong. There's always going to be a quip, or there's going to be a line when people's lives are in danger, right? That's
Well,
that's
yeah, yeah,
that's what happens when you grow up watching Die Hard and The Last Boy Scout and
yeah.
Lethal Weapon and Terminator and stuff like that. That invariably is gonna happen. It's gonna bleed into your writing. Shane
Yes.
Black, we have to thank for
Oh
for
boy.
that. But I think a lot of the stuff that I mean, I love doing it, right? I love having these scenes where it's two people arguing about something, probably a murder investigation, while they are stuck at the checkout line that should be for only 1 to 12 items, but you've got people that are lined up in front that have got like 40 items, and they're doing that, and suddenly you've got this whole. So there's the opening scene for the Village Hall Vendetta is Amata arguing with someone at the line at a burger joint, and
Mm.
she can't get her head around why they don't serve stew, and she wants a bowl of stew with some bread. And the guy behind the desk is going, "But we're a burger place, right? Have you never been in a burger joint before?" And then the queue behind starts form. That
Yeah.
type of stuff happens. That I've witnessed stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's vitally important to have that in something like Cozy Crime, because again, that there's nothing stranger and there's nothing funnier than real life sometimes, right?
Yeah.
It's not all the time, obviously, not
Yeah.
all the time. And
Yeah.
but these little tidbits, it's good for building character, and I think you're given a lot more room in cozy mystery and cozy crime writing to have these little moments in it than you would necessarily a police procedural, for example, where you've got listen, it's not to say that you can't have them in these, far from it. And there's a litany of real life characters that are in other genres.
You did reference Lethal Weapon, which is a police procedural, but it is a comedy. It's a you know.
It is, and you know, Lethal Weapon 3, the scene that immediately pops up is you know, throughout Lethal Weapon 3, Riggs, Mel Gibson, is giving up smoking, and that leads to certain gags throughout it. He's given an onion at one point to eat, and then but that whole thing then leads to the scene where Murtaugh, Danny Glover's Murtaugh, shoots a teenager who was friends with his son because he's running with gangs, and then they've got illegal guns and stuff, and it all, you know, it jumps. That as a franchise jumps from those sort of moments. They're interspliced with it, but that, for me, what I always loved about Lethal Weapon is that the action sequences are great and stuff like that, but are they any better than any other action movie that was out at the same time? Probably not, but I always loved that chemistry that those two characters had that brought those real life moments, or relative real life moments, they brought them to the fore, and those are the bits I watch those movies for, right?
Yeah.
That's it. I don't need to see another car crash. I don't need to see another car chase. I can get them from anywhere. Yeah. But similarly, why I keep going back to those types of movies is because they've got those parts in it. And you know, I can't remember the last time I watched what's the Cobra with Stallone, because it's really humorless, right? It's really lifeless, or you know, Commando with Schwarzenegger, just as much action, but nowhere near that sort of real life mundanity that I love. And I'm privileged to be able to write. I'm privileged to be able to fill my books with that type of stuff, because there's that sort of expectation from the readership that you're going to get that sort of stuff in a cozy mystery, and it's something to celebrate. I know I celebrate it. I love it.
Definitely. So I'm curious, because it's fun because you've been mentioning things like Lethal Weapon and Die Hard and whatnot, which are not cozy. They are the farthest thing from cozy. They're more hard boiled. They're more kind of, they come from the thriller world. So I'm curious, are there any other, you know, you're working on your third Bingo Hall book, but are there other crime genres that you would like to explore in the future?
I mean, I never rule out. I never rule out, because I think if you're one of the big things that I relish as a writer, or relish being the writer that I am, is flexibility. You know, look, you said it there just a moment ago, talking about having that flexibility to be able to move one scene that you thought was going to go there to later on because you want to develop something else.
Yeah,
I think it's vital as a writer to have that flexibility, because it's not just you sitting down and writing it. The flexibility translates to every step of the process to get a book on the shelf, because it takes a village it genuinely does take a village to have a book published. And that's from marketing to sales to editing to writing the thing to representation, you know, every element of it. And you've got to be flexible, and you've got to remain flexible and open-minded to these types of things. And it starts with the work. It starts with the actual writing. So I would never ever rule out an opportunity to do something else. I do genuinely think that I've found my voice, found my writing voice with Cosy, because I love it so much. And again, it's as much an escape, if for nothing else, it's an escape for me than it is everything else. I worked on something new over the summer. That I can't really go into too many details about, but that was it's not specifically cozy. It's maybe a tad edgier, for want of a better label, than that, but it's still kind of rooted in that sort of same sphere. But it was really, really good. I really enjoyed it, because it was the first sort of new thing from the ground up that I built for about 3 years, and it was really hard. and I hadn't realized how much of a sort of comfort zone that I'd clearly gotten myself into with the Bingo Hall Detectives, because that's the thing, when you write a second book and a third book and what have you, you know, you're going in with that predisposition that you know exactly who these characters are and their quirks. And yes, of course, they're going to be developing, they're going to be changing and stuff like that. But you have that firm grounding. Whereas starting something brand new and introducing brand new characters, I was like, oh my God, this is really hard. Is this what writing is? But then again, you know, once I got over that hump, I was like, oh, you know, I really, really got into it. And I'm so glad that I did it. And I'm so glad that I did it when I did it, because I think if I'd left it any longer,
Mm.
it would have only gotten harder. It's like that awful analogy of holding on to a plane's wheel as it
Yeah.
takes off. The longer you hold on, the worse the fall's going to be, and
Yep.
that's exactly what it was like. So it was good to do, and again, yeah, flexibility and open mindedness. I'd love to challenge myself, because that's it. You've got to challenge yourself as a writer,
Yeah.
because if you don't,
Absolutely.
you get you get complacent, and ultimately that comes across in the writing, and you don't want that.
No.
You don't want that for your readers. You don't want that for yourself. You've got to stay open minded. Keep your head on a swivel, to use a
Yes.
sports analogy.
There you go. So the last question I have for you is I also find it fun when I have authors on to kind of break some of the myths and let people in on really sometimes the difficulty or not difficulty that an author has had in getting their work out there.
Yeah, yeah,
So you got to remind me where were you when you finished bingo halls? Did you have an agent? Did you have a publisher ready? What
yeah.
was that process like?
So I had so I got my agent when I was offered my contract for the Bingo Hall Detectives with Harper North,
Mm,
and um, before that I'd always been unrepresented. I kind of represented myself because
mm,
with my background in journalism, and I used to do a lot of, still do a lot of review work and stuff like that. I knew quite a lot of people in the industry, but
yeah,
um, I'm a total convert to having an agent, because they are they're wonderful, right? Not only are they
yeah,
another champion for you as an author when you're not there, but I've got a wonderful agent, Elizabeth, at
mm,
North Bank, who is 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Any question, stupid, big, small, it doesn't matter. She's there and she
yeah,
answers it, and I am very, very blessed, because I've got a wonderful team at Harper North as well.
mm,
My editor, Jen Pegg, who just gets me as a writer. She gets these characters, she gets this series. So I mean, it's not to say that you can't do it without agents, and you can't do it without
mm,
traditional publishers and stuff like that. Far from it, because that's the great thing about this industry, is that it's a broad church.
yeah,
So what I will say is that you've got to be flexible. But
yeah,
we've talked about this already. You've got to be flexible. You've got to be open to new ideas. You've got to be able to share these stories and want to make them the best that they can be. And a lot of
yeah,
that comes about through the relationships with your editors and with your publishers. And another thing that I try and say is that, the relationship's got to go both ways. You've got to get on with your agent, because you could be
yeah,
working with this person for years and years and years and decades, and same with your publishers and your editors. It's got to be a two-way system. It's got to work for you as well as them.
yeah,
And not jumping at the first opportunity that comes along if it's not right. It's sometimes that's the hardest thing in the world, but sometimes it's for the best. And there's countless horror stories that,
yes,
that you'll hear from writers that did the wrong thing, or just didn't have that spark, or didn't have that sort of relationship. I've been very, very lucky. I
yeah,
know how lucky, and I'm very grateful as to how lucky I am with the relationships that I've got within the capacity of it.
yeah,
And as we talked about before we came on air, and I do this a lot in my teaching, is that you don't have to be a professional writer to be
mm,
professional about your writing. Be
definitely,
professional about it.
yeah,
Edit it. You're going to be dealing with professionals
yeah,
within the industry. It's their job. It's your job as well, if you want to be a writer, if you're serious about it. So be professional about it. Be proud of your work,
yep,
but give it the edits that it needs. Send the right things to the right people, and educate yourself in how the industry works. They're my kind of top lessons that I wish I
yeah,
knew 10
yeah,
years ago, long before
God,
I was
yeah.
published.
Oh geez. Oh geez. Yes, I agree. I agree. I agree. Yes, oof, yes, my first book is terrible.
I highly doubt that. I highly doubt
Oh,
that. I highly doubt that.
I'll send it to you one day.
I'd love that. I'd love it. I'd love it. I'll pinch all the ideas. There you go.
Oh God, yes. Jonathan, this was a lot of fun. I like having you on, talking about anything and everything, really.
Thank you
But
very
I
much.
enjoyed having you on today. Where can people find you on the interwebs if you want them to?
I always my electronic door is always open.
Mm,
So I'm on a X at JD Whitelaw 13. I'm on Instagram at JD Whitelaw 13. I'm on Threads at JD Whitelaw 13. There's a trend here, brand marketing, as they say.
Yes.
And yeah, get me on social media. I'm usually hanging around there,
There you
doing
go.
something, or asking silly questions, or posting pictures of my frozen beard. Over as it was in Canada. We've got a lovely, at time of recording, it's a lovely clear blue sky day, not a snowflake to be seen, whereas this time last year it was about, I think, 3 inches deep, and I was having to go out every morning to clear the driveway.
Ah, yes. You know what? I really wish we would get some snow. We'll see.
I'll
We'll
send
see.
some over.
Please do.
I'll FedEx it.
Please do. I would love that. Yeah, once again, Jonathan, this was a lot of fun. If anyone listening, if you've not purchased Jonathan's books, please go do so. There are links in the description, whether you're listening on Apple or Spotify or watching on YouTube, there are links to go buy Jonathan's books, and I highly recommend them. Until then, I will see you guys next week.
The Secret Circle.